Well, welcome everybody to the San Diego ULT Aquarian Series. And today we will be hearing a presentation from Dr. Judy Saltzman on the Monadic stream. And I'm going to share my screen for a minute. I'm going to show you some of the upcoming presentations that we have. And let me try this thing here. So the quote for today from Hermes, as you know, that this whole presentation series is based on the Aquarian Almanac, and the Aquarian Almanac has daily quotes that pertain to the topic for that week, the theme for reflection. And this week it's the Monadic stream, and it says in Hermes as the lead quote, "As pilgrim souls, all human beings are essentially integral parts of a single monadic stream of evolution and a vast collective spiritual odyssey." And as you can see, we are serializing the Aquarian Almanac itself, and it has various quotes for the week on this topic. I'll just show you a few of the topics upcoming. Next week, we will be hearing on the subject of the cycle of the Phoenix. Is that Easter? Next week, next Sunday? I think it is.
Yes.
And the week after that, we'll be hearing a presentation on mental posture. And it's one of our younger people that attends this, and she summons the courage to do it. And we'll all be here to support her, I'm sure. And the week after that will be a presentation on soul education. And the president of the American section of the Theosophical Society will be presenting on that, Dr. Barbara Hebert. That's 2 weeks from now. And the week after that will be a presentation on the Buddha vow. It seems that there's always a presentation in May in relation to Buddha Purnima. This is just prior to that, April 29th. And so that's the next 4. And as we said before, we will be hearing a presentation today on the Monadic stream. And Dr. Judy Saltzman, take it away.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to screen share. It hasn't come up yet.
You need to double click it.
Yeah, here it is. All right.
And then
Well, I'm going
the upper
to go to the first slide. Right-hand corner.
Upper right-hand corner.
Upper right-hand corner. Yeah, correct. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, here we are. Can everyone hear me all right? I guess so. All right. So the monadic stream is a very difficult, profound topic, and we're all limited, of course, epistemologically by our current intelligence. We are self-reflective divine monads, but we're not on the level of adeptship yet. But we are at least able to be considered divine. At least Pythagoras said, "Rest easily, the race of men is divine." So we have attained the state where we can intelligently discuss this. But all the kingdoms of nature, as was said from Hermes, are part of the monadic stream. This includes not only the human kingdom, but the animal kingdom with its various parts, and the vegetable kingdom, and the mineral kingdom. They're all part of the monadic stream. And of course, the monadic stream is continuing constantly. There are 250 people born every second and 150 dying. So there are more monads are coming in to this earth than are leaving. And we also know we're not living correctly because there are 4 people dying of starvation every second. So we're not sharing our food properly. So we could talk about that later. But let's talk about the monad. First of all, let's talk about the origin of the monad. Now, stanza 3 of the book of Xian in the Secret Doctrine describes the reawakening of the universe to life after pralaya, or non-manifestation. It depicts the emergence of the monads from their state of absorption within the one, the earliest and highest stage in the formation of worlds. The term monad being one which may apply to the vastest solar system or the tiniest atom. Now, this may seem extraordinary, but when we talk about atom also in the Secret Doctrine, we're not just talking about the atom of modern science, which is divisible, as we know, with atomic energy, but we're talking about a sevenfold atom, as well as a sevenfold solar system that is a unit. And the Secret Doctrine also says in the transactions, matter is destructible in form, while the atoms are absolutely indestructible, being the quintessence of substance. And here I mean by atoms the primordial divine unit, not the atoms of modern science. So this is a very important point. Again, what really is an atom, and this even goes back to Lucretius, who is a materialist philosopher of the Roman era about 100 BCE, who talks about an indivisible unit. So the real atom, the life atom, is an indivisible unit. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, would someone like to read from the book of Xian so you don't hear me all the time?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Please read that.
Okay. The root of life was in every drop of the ocean of immortality, and the ocean was radiant light, which was fire and heat and motion. Darkness vanished and was no more. It disappeared in its own essence, the body of fire and water, or father and mother. The atoms or monads are immersed in this ocean of immortality. This ocean is not matter as we know it, but the mundane egg or primordial substance.
All right, well, thank you. I have always loved this passage. I read it many years ago when I was in Berlin, Germany, and it made me realize that life, as many materialists talk about, is not an afterthought of a physical universe, but life always was, is, and will be. Although forms change, there is always life. And when we talk about a monad, we talk about an indivisible unit, whether it's as tiny as an atom or as great as a solar system. It is a unit. And of course, each of us is a divine monad or individual unit. Although we're not fully conscious yet, we spend a third of our lives asleep. If we're lucky, that is. Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, so let's have this one. Would someone like to read this one? What is a monad?
I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
What is a monad? A unit which is indivisible, derived from the Pythagorean monas, one. There are 7 kingdoms, but in our 4th round, we are concerned with 4 classes of monads: the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. Monads are windowless. The monad is eternal and occupies ever-evolving vehicles. It has no physical extension. Every human is a divine monad, but most are asleep and unaware of their immortality.
All right, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is an important point that if you remember in the life of the Buddha, when he attained to enlightenment, his disciples who had been with him and when he was fasting saw that he was looking well and quite different. So they said, "Are you a god?" And he said, "No, I'm not a god." "Well, then you are a man." He said, "No, I'm not a man like you anymore. I am awake." And the thing about us, even though we are divine monads, we are, a sense, not self-consciously aware of our immortality. And of course, our monad is not visible. I mean, when we look at each other, we look at each other's physical body through our sense of sight. So we can't see the monad in the other person, nor can the monad really see it on our plane except through the physical senses. So that is part of what is meant by windowless, and Leibniz discusses that. And of course, there is a whole article in The Secret Doctrine about the mineral monad. It's also in 5 Years of Theosophy. And the mineral monad, and this is even in Spinoza, is just as much conscious and alive in its own way as we are. I remember once I had the experience in San Jose of being out in the Almaden vineyards when my mother's company was having a picnic, and there were about 100 people eating and drinking, and all of a sudden there was an earthquake, and we looked over at the mountains. That's where the San Andreas Fault was, and the mountains just moved like an accordion. And I thought, those mountains are alive. They're trying to tell us something. Stop being foolish and drinking wine, maybe. But I also saw this later at the San Jose State University. We had an earthquake in the geology lab, and the seismograph just went crazy, which was just an amazing moment, because I realized something. I didn't know it then at the age of 20 or something, but all of nature is alive, including the mineral monad. So let's move on here. Okay. Would someone like to read this?
I can read that, Judy.
Thank you.
3 classes of monad. 1, the most developed monad, lunar gods, Pitris, whose function it is to pass the first round through the whole triple cycle of mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdom in their most ethereal, filmy, and rudimentary forms, in order to clothe themselves in and assimilate the nature of the newly formed chain. They are those who first reach the human form, if there can be any human form in the realm of the most subjective, on globe A of the first round. It is they, therefore, who lead and represent the human element during the second and third rounds. For the second class are those who came behind them. Those classes who reach the human stage, the 3.5 rounds, become men. It stands to reason that these men do not resemble the men of today, either by form or nature.
Okay, thank you. I think I left out a word there. Human stage in the first 3.5 rounds. But here the word men is obviously in quotation because they're not human beings in the sense of mentes or manas in the same physical form we're in. And of course, when human beings came over from the lunar chain, they were the leaders. We call them the lunar gods, the Petries, who were the formulators of our physical form. And of course, it's the solar Petries who later lit up our manas over 18 million years ago, which is described in volume 2, page 272 of The Secret Doctrine. But if you look at the chart in The Secret Doctrine on page 172, it will show you the different globes from the moon. And in a sense, we are repeating, but on a higher level, the same cycles that went on in the moon chain. And of course, the moon we see is only the 4th round corpse of where we were before. It's obviously older than we are, but it forms a gravitational Earth-Moon system and has a huge effect, and not only on our Earth through the tides, for example, but also on our physical bodies, such as the female cycle and other areas. But also we'll have to talk about men. Clearly, the early men on the early globes were not fully formed physically, and even in the early stages of this round, for example, during the Jurassic Age, we do not have physical men yet, but astral forms when dinosaurs were much bigger, when atmospheric pressure was much less. And now atmospheric pressure is greater and we are much more condensed in form. But I know this may sound very strange to people, but if you read Plato's Symposium, the 3rd speech in Plato's Symposium, where Aristophanes talks about the early man, is supposed to be a kind of a joke. But here Plato is really saying that man was in a much different form and perhaps was too physical and strong and powerful. So Zeus decided to cut us in half. And ever since then, we've been looking for our other half, and that's what love is. Well, this is meant to be funny, but also it's where Plato is being quite serious in his own way. If you read the book called Plato's Myths, it explains it very well. So let's go to the next idea. Okay, now would someone like to read about the 3rd class of monads, the laggards?
I can read that, Judy.
Thank you. Okay.
The laggards, the monads that are retarded and will not reach, by reason of karmic impediments, the human stage at or during this cycle or round, save one exception, spoken of elsewhere as already promised. Secret Doctrine 175. The laggards are those incarnated into animal bodies, mammals, with the exception of the great apes, will not become human will not become human astral forms, highest elementals, until the 6th and 7th races, and be in the lowest human forms in the 5th round. Because the door to the human monadic chain closed before the beginning of the 5th root race, only those anthropoid apes produced by the mindless men of the 3rd root race and repeated with full cognizance in the fourth root race, will become human in this round. See Genesis 6 and The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, 184, 185.
Okay, well, it's sometimes in the footnotes of the text that she gives a great deal of information. And of course, this is one of the most controversial doctrines in the Secret Doctrine, that the anthropoid apes came from us rather than the Darwinian idea that he actually says in Origin of Species that we developed along a similar line as the great apes rather than simply coming from them. But according to HBB, Darwin got it only about half right. But all I could say is I once had the experience while I was in Berlin and went to the Berlin Zoo, which is quite a magnificent facility for animals, although you feel so sad that they're entrapped. But I looked through a 6-inch glass directly at the face of an anthropoid ape. And I think it was probably the most human and saddest face I have ever seen. And I think Jane Goodall was a member, or at least went to the Theosophical Society in England. And I think she probably realized about Coco, who lived to be 46, and had a vocabulary of over 4,000 words in sign language, that she was an inherently a trapped human ego. And so this happened first because of what HPB calls mindless men who were not yet lit up in their monastic essence in the third round, but then it was repeated again in the fourth round, early fourth round, with the Atlanteans, who did know what they were doing. And of course, this has entrapped a certain number of human egos, but they're eventually the great apes will die out and then eventually move into human form before other animals will move into human form. So there'll be a kind of reward for them. And this doesn't mean we're going to be having hairy children anytime soon, but that eventually in this cycle, in the 6th and 7th races to come, they're going to be in elemental form. And of course, every elemental, even though they were generally senseless, will eventually become a monad. I understand, but I can't say that I fully understand this. So let's move on to a little bit more. If you understand this idea, there are 3 different classes we're dealing with here. Okay, from the lunar to the earth chain. Now again, if you look at page 172, volume 1 of The Secret Doctrine, it has a diagram on this. This is rather difficult to understand, and I'm sorry, I think there's a typo in this, but would someone like to read this for us as well? Thank you.
I will.
Thanks.
From lunar to earth chain. The lunar monads, or petries, having ended their evolution on that chain, emerged into the earth chain. Just as there are 7 earths, there were 7 moons. We are repeating on the earth chain what happened on the 7 globes of the moon chain, only in a superior manner. See The Secret Doctrine 1, page 172 diagram. Evolution progresses upward in a logarithmic spiral. Globe D on the moon gets D plus on our planet. The moon we see is the corpse of the 4th round, which follows and influences us through tides and human cycles. It will become a ring and disappear on this plane. HPB writes, the real sun and the real moon are as invisible as the real man. From SD1, page 177.
All right, well, thank you. Sorry about the typo in this, but what struck me as extraordinary about this is that we're not on a very high level yet. We're about D plus compared to what we were on the moon. We have nevertheless progressed from that cycle, but we're down here in the fifth race and the fourth round, dealing with our karma from the Atlanteans who destroyed themselves. And we are, of course, still down here fighting with each other and not sharing what we have properly and not living in a way that always helps each other and not living in a compassionate way toward all beings. But also we have to understand that what we're seeing is not the real sun. The real sun, of course, is not visible to us, but we're seeing on this round just a mirror-like reflection of a more powerful divine sun in our galaxy. Nor is where we were before, the real moon visible. And of course, none of us sees each other as we really are during our waking state, at least. We're seeing only the physical man and hearing through our senses. Now, perhaps when we're asleep, if we're lucky enough to receive ideas and instructions in our sleep, maybe we can see each other as we really are. But of course, in dreams, we only get a small reflection of what this is. Now let's move on to another part of this idea. Okay. Now, what's the nature of the human monad itself? Now, would somebody like to read what HBB wrote about this?
I will.
Thank you.
H.P. Blavatsky wrote, the spiritual monad is one, universal, boundless, and impartite, whole ray, nevertheless form what we, in our ignorance, call the individual monads of men. So the mineral monad, being at the opposite point of the circle, is also one, and from it proceeds the countless physical atoms, which science is beginning to regard as individualized. The monad is a combination of the last two principles in man, the sixth and the seventh. The term monad applies only to the dual, Atma Buddhi, not to the highest spiritual, vivifying principle, Atma alone. The spiritual soul has no existence if divorced from the Atma. SD1, pages 177, 178.
All right, thank you. Well, this is a very important point because on the one hand, the monad is definitely a unit that is indivisible, yet the last two, and she, of course, has in quotation principles because the Atma is not really a human principle, but the universal spiritual soul. Yet the monad, if ever divorced from the Atma, if the Buddhi is ever divorced from the Atma, which of course also you could say includes the higher manas, then of course something terrible has happened to that monad. It said that if someone is a black magician life after life, knowingly doing evil, that their higher triad can dissipate in some way. And this student doesn't fully understand this, but the monad is essentially the Atma Buddhi, which includes some of the higher manas, in my understanding. So let's move on, unless is there someone who has a burning question about this? Okay, let's go and finish this then. Okay, now this is from Leibniz, the German philosopher of the 17th century, who was incredibly brilliant. And he's also one of the most academically neglected philosophers. And he wrote La Monadologie in French. Although he was a German of Slavic descent and an aristocrat, he was a baron. And also lived at the same time as Spinoza. And HPB says in The Secret Doctrine that if their two systems were put together, you would have virtually the occult doctrine. But it was only Nandini Iyer at UC Santa Barbara who was actually teaching Leibniz and Spinoza. Everyone else just considered them to be old fools. So very sad that this has happened in the academic world of philosophy. So would somebody like to read what Leibniz says in the Monadology?
Well, if no one else will, I'll read it.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Leibniz on the monad. That which is outside of us in an absolute manner are souls or centers of force. By outside of us, he means that monads are not the perishable physical body, but the immortal human soul. More than that, they are the unity of units, the reality of the manifested world. Monads are centers of force and matter in a world of infinite gradation. Leibniz wrote, "The world is not a machine. Everything in it has force, life, thought, desire. The monads reflect the universe. Each form its own angle, each its own degree. The great community extends upwards and downwards from man through the whole creation. The world, in brief, is a living society." J. Salzman, Leibniz, Spinoza, and the Secret Doctrine.
Okay, well, this is just, I make a brief commentary on what Leibniz says in this passage in an essay that I wrote, which I haven't published yet, but I hope to. But here Leibniz is really hitting on the occult doctrine, in that he's saying that the world is a living, vibrant, conscious entity, not only human beings, but of course the animal, vegetable, and mineral monad. And of course, in his day, they didn't have the current modern scientific idea of the Bohr atom, which of course is only a model. It looks like a solar system in 3D, but that's not really what it is. We really can't see it. But he is talking again about an individual entity, and of course he's talking about a human soul, which is immortal, and he does have an idea of life, everlasting immortality. His idea is essentially that the human being will metamorphosize into another form, but still be the same immortal monad. So yes, he does think there's reincarnation, but he calls it metamorphosis. So let's go on from there. So this is from Raghavan Iyer, and we're just about at the end. So would someone like to read this one?
I will, Judy.
Thank you.
Gods, monads, and atoms. To understand this in terms of monads, one might say that all monads are reflecting mirrors. It is possible for every monad to reflect only partially because every monad is involved in the modification of cognition, like a lens which is linked up with an aperture, which is a limitation upon it. This could be misleading because in metaphysical space, in every atom and within the mind of every man, there is the capacity to release the true monadic reflection, which is a diamond light, many faceted and symmetrical. Raghavan Iyer, Hermes, the Gupta Vidya 1, page 2. In the heart of man, the entire universe is reflected. Rumi.
Well, thank you. I thought
You're
it would be
welcome.
good to quote Rumi at the end here because he was a highly enlightened Sufi philosopher. And in a sense, not only do the monads mirror each other, albeit imperfectly, especially in our form, as Raghavan teaches us, but it's like when we look at the mirror image of ourselves, what we're seeing is actually backwards. The right looks like it's on the left and the left on the right. The same way everything is supposedly in the astral is in reverse. But there's also a sense in which Rumi hits it right on the head here that every one of us is a microcosm of the macrocosm. So even in our bodies, we have this whole history of what we've been through as monads. I mean, even in the materialists would say we're made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in our physical body. So we are reflecting the stuff of the stars in this universe. So this is all that I have written out. It's not everything that deals with the monad and the secret doctrine, but it's probably enough to discuss. So I'm going to go back now to the illusion of who I am, so we can look at each other. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to stop the screen share.
That was magnificent. Thank you, Judy, so much.
Oh well, well, that's very kind of you to say that. Now, well,
Can I ask you a question while people are putting their
please.
thoughts together?
Yeah. Okay.
Remember on that slide where it talked about the human monad and you asked if there's any burning questions? My burning question is about the Atma Buddhi. And in a way, they're like cemented together. They're the monad, right? They're the unit.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it's possible for there to be a separation, apparently. Could you talk about that?
Well, from what I understand, I can remember talking about this with Raghavan Iyer years ago. Of course, was brilliantly knowledgeable, and I think he said that in the case of, for example, what Plato calls the tyrant, and what Theosophy calls the black magician, that there could be a case in which a being becomes so evil that the monad actually separates from the universal whole and perhaps either dissipates, or in Plato's mythology in the Phaedo, where Socrates becomes kind of like a prophet before he's going to die, winds up in Tartarus, and that's where you don't get out. Well, I don't know whether that means for the rest of the Manvantara or the Kalpa or what, but the nature is through with that being because it's essentially made a decision to be self-destructive. There's an ignorance that, but this is not very common. Although I do understand there are beings that are highly disconnected from their higher self, and that the life force will continue, perhaps for several lifetimes, and maybe a spark could wake them up again, but they're in pretty bad shape. It's kind of like if you've ever read Dostoevsky's The Grand Inquisitor, in which this very old cardinal encounters the Christ whom they have imprisoned in Seville, Spain, and the Grand Inquisitor has become so incredibly evil. I mean, he even turns to Jesus and said, "We turned away from you long ago," and Jesus feels so sorry for him, he kisses him because he knows that he's going to crack up essentially.
Mm.
So that's what I think she's talking about. But maybe somebody can add to this. Hi, Monica, you look beautiful.
Oh, Dr. Judy, thank you.
Your illusion. Hello, you're real enough.
This was so amazing. I have to say, I keep getting frustrated about this idea about the vegetable monad, the mineral monad, the animal monad. And then I go back to the idea that the monad is two compartments, Atma Buddhi. So what do we mean when we say the mineral monad? Is it a specific kind of monad that inhabits only the mineral kingdom, and so on with the vegetable and animal? And how is it different? I still do not have that together. If you could help.
Well, I will try to help, but I can't say that I fully understand. But remember that a monad is a unit. So with those beings that are currently minerals and on our planet or on other planets, they may be quite different. And of course, perhaps we're all from other planets. I remember you saying that once. With the mineral monad, that is not physically visible either qua monad, but we can see rocks and mountains and all this. But that monad is developed specifically in relation to continue that monad's development. And the mineral will eventually become the vegetable, the animal. And we know that there are some vegetables that have animal-like properties, that they move around. And of course, there are some animals that are so highly intelligent. Well, not only the great apes, but I have met dogs that I swear if they had vocal cords, they could talk to us. The cat, of course, is more mysterious. I think they are a lot smarter than they pretend to be. And I think they might have come over from Venus in the third round. I'm
Wow.
not sure. I asked one of them once, I said, "Did you come over from Venus?" And they said, "Oh, yes, it got too hot. So we came over here." Of course, I'm just joking. But if you look at the Secret Doctrine around page 174, I think it talks about this. But you've got to read it for yourself. And I would say that every monad is specifically geared to be the energetic instigator and propagator of the monad of which they are a part. And of course, currently the human monad, as Pythagoras says, is divine, but we're quite unaware of our own divinity most of the time. We're involved in these everyday mundane lower manus activities which cause us to suffer. And hopefully there'll be a time in which we won't suffer, but we seem to be continuing suffering because of our behavior here. As I said, we're only on a D plus level, which is at a very high grade as yet. Okay.
Thank you for that.
Well, it's,
That's
well-
a little true for
well,
sure.
thank you for your question. Yes, are there other questions?
You got Marlon is the next one in line, it looks like.
Hello, thank you so much, Judy. It's as with most everything you say, it was beautiful and very interesting to listen to, very comprehensive. In regard to Monica's question, there is an interesting thing about, it helps me to think about things. I can get very mixed up when I think just about the concepts in that. But I found it very interesting when I read that trees, you might have a tree that's by water, and you might have a tree that is distant from the water. And this forest of trees will pass water from root to root to root, so that the distant tree gets water. And to me, that's an illustration, or a vague example, if you will, of this unity, the monadic unity, the sharing of life for the fellow, in this case, tree. And I look at my cat, Judy, and sometimes my cat knows when there are, they have this sixth sense, if you will, of what's going on in the house and how many kids are in the house. And even before the kids arrive, it gets excited that there are going to be kids, and he's peering in the door and etc. It's this spiritual, this invisible realm, which I think is interesting and hard to talk about. And finally, I would like to, if I may, recommend this book. This is the one. This is by Heinrich Taz. And it says, the subtitle, How an Ancient Idea Holds Future of Physics. And it's very interesting. He points out that contemporary, most of, well, not really contemporary right now, 50, 60 years ago, the quantum physics was very bound in time and place. And then he makes this very interesting comparison that which is before time and place is what contemporary physics is, quantum physics, is trying to understand. It's very Greek, isn't it? Uranus, then Saturn, and time, and so on and so on. So he refers to it as a decoherence. The assumption is the universe is a monad. And this is what quantum physicists are trying to come to grips with now. It's very different from Bohr, who is very happy to take our contemporary or our previous vision of gravity, and which is material and kind of everyday based. And along comes Einstein, and he says gravity is a very different thing. Time and place, it's all kind of unified. And this is what contemporary quantum physicists are working with. That Bohr had interesting ideas, just like gravity, it works in the everyday world. But now they're pointing to a transcendental, universal quantum physics that is not so dependent upon individual perspectives that can be different one to another. You're there and I'm here, and I wish I were there to be able to talk with you in person. But it's this transcendental, monadic, pre-time and place universe that quantum physicists are exploring now. And actually, according to him, very strongly leaning toward. And he refers to Plato. He does not refer, I'm sorry to say, to the Vedic thought and things like that. But he refers to Plato, he refers to Spinoza, he refers to Leibniz. And And it's very interesting. So there is this is the hard thing, and why I like so much to listen to Judy. That is that they're exploring the unmanifest, at least in our everyday world. The unmanifest manifests on a different plane, where it is more unified, where the mathematician can fit things together, and et cetera, and so on. So I kind of went from the tree route to the quantum physics, but I think there's a unity there. There is this sense, this underlying unity in life. And yeah, it's like, probably you're familiar with it. It's an older experiment. There was a guy, he was a scientist sitting in his lab, and he took his EKG machine and flicked it onto his flower. And he went to put his cigarette out on the plant, and the plant just freaked out, right? And so he figured, okay, let me see what's going on. He went and put the EKG machine on a plant in a distance away, far distance away, went back to his lab, and he thought, I'm going to go light the plant. And the plant freaked out at the very moment that he thought he was going to go light the plant. So it's these kinds of things that I find interesting. Judy can probably explain it much better, and other people there. But I just thought I'd mention that. It was very interesting, especially this quantum physics and how it's developing.
Well, thank you. You've explained a lot. I'm glad to see there's an open-minded German, because I recently there are a group of German scientists who came out with the statement that the moon clearly came out of the earth, and this is not arguable anymore.
Yeah.
Because of the same kind of minerals and even water on the moon. And of course, their theory, they're completely wrong according to secret doctrine. But there are two aspects of what you said that I'll try to address. One is that we know that redwood trees unite their roots together, and that's one reason they can stand so tall and alone. And they are so big, they may go back even to the third race when human beings were much bigger. And we know these giant trees in California and Oregon are threatened. I belong to an organization where we're actually buying the redwood forests in order to preserve them from logging companies who greedily want to use them. But if you find the mother and father tree, according to a Canadian scientist named Suzanne Simard, any tree will regenerate. Excuse me. My phone just went off, but I put it. You can regenerate trees if you have a mother and father tree, as in the big basin. I remember as a child, I went to the mother and father tree, and I just felt like prostrating myself, because I realized what greatness there was in these trees, that they, as you say, share water. And of course, we do the most ridiculous things. Dr. Samard pointed out that the Weyerhaeuser Company wanted to destroy a lot of the fauna and fungi around the trees, because she thought that they would grow. They thought they would grow faster. And of course, she proved scientifically that all this was necessary to their growth. So she's working very hard. And the other thing about the quantum world, I know Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about the
Yes.
fact that there's no time in the quantum world. Now, I don't know how they determine this. I once asked a philosopher of physics about how do you determine that there's no time in the quantum world? Well, and we think of time as a movement from one thing to another. Well, we also know that the matter of the quantum world is really pure energy. And really what matter is, we seem to think that it's something very solid. We experience in that way, but we're really all energy states. And of course, we're very temporary energy states, and matter is something that's fluctuating very fast. at the moment, and really it's the monad or soul which is permanent and internal.
Mhm.
So I'm glad to hear there's a German thinker that is opening up a bit about this idea. And as I said, I can't claim to fully understand it. I'm only struggling with it as we all are. Yeah, but perhaps there are other comments or questions on this point or another one.
We've got Adam Finney here. He's got a burning question.
Okay.
Hi, Judy.
Hi, Adam.
I-
So glad you're here.
Yeah, I have a kind of difficult question. So we understand that we're not part of the class of monads known as the laggards because we have a human birth. We also know from the secret doctrine that one of the issues that we're experiencing is that certain souls were not ready to incarnate into the human bodies that were not immortal and that are perishable. So part of our karma that we're dealing with is that we're a little behind, that we weren't part of that first wave of humanity that came across in the monadic stream that has graduated the human form. Essentially, maybe they're Dhyani Buddhas at this point, but I know from reading an old Raghavan Iyer essay that essentially we're behind because we weren't here and weren't doing our work, and so maybe we took a little bit of a vacation, and now we're essentially in the D globe as humans. As a teacher, I know that there's a problem with the old saying that D's get degrees. And we're part of the D globe. I don't know if it's necessarily that we're not living up to our potential or that we're behind, but it feels like the hesitancy to incarnate as humans has created some karma that we're working through. And of course, we know that history is very problematic and that we have karma to work through from that as well. One thing that the question I have, I guess, is that when we think about plants and animals, they're behind us in this sense. And we know how pure these souls are. Like in the Vedic ecology essay that I was lucky enough to witness in person and then rereading it, Nandini talks about the loyalty of the dog and how we have these great companions. You know, they're so loyal. They have godlike loyalty, really. I mean, there's a reason that they've been represented as such in different mythologies. So it's hard for this student to think about the dog that I have sitting here beside me, who just woke up from a nap and is very excited, as a being that's at all selfish because they are so loyal. But essentially, part of the delay, if I'm understanding it correctly, in the monadic stream was essentially a selfish act by humans, and this student included, and possibly explains why we're a little bit behind and not Dhyani Buddhas yet. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
All right. Well, you have asked a very complicated question, maybe because you, like Marlon, are and have been a teacher of teenagers, and of course, we know at that stage, we tend to be a bit selfish and egocentric, and because we're developing ourselves, and we all have to develop ourselves. But I know in reading the book of Zion, and I don't purport to fully understand it, I know there's statements like, the sweat-born have despoiled our abodes. This is karma. And there is a reluctance of the monads of the second class, which we appear to be, to incarnate into abodes that were less than pure. Well, it is clear that the monads who are behind us, like the wonderful dogs, for example, or I remember once the great philosopher of Islam, Ibn Arabi, made the statement that trees are so wonderful because they serve Allah perfectly. And of course, the dog is so perfectly loyal and wonderful. And yet we know human beings are capable of disloyalty. Well, of course, the dog does not have higher manas. The dog is not going to be self-consciously immortal and having an after-death state. This is all why it's all right for veterinarians to sometimes have to put down an animal so that they won't suffer. Well, we know it's very bad for a human being to commit suicide or to have euthanasia done on us before our time, because we will have an after-death state that will be less than happy and will be out of time and will seem like it will be a very bad kamalokic state. But animals are pure in the sense that they have not gotten to a state where they really have free will. For example, they don't have a choice to mate or not to mate. When the mating season comes and they're feral, they simply have to mate. It is nature with them. Well, we know with us it's much more complicated, romance and all these other things, which may be illusory, but they're very real when experienced, especially when young. So I can say I'm not sure I'm fully answering your question. That we are about 1,000,000 years behind, I think, according to the secret doctrine. We should be in a much better place now. We shouldn't be killing each other and denying each other food and being very, very selfish. People who amass immense fortunes have refused to share with others. And of course, we know people who are willing to kill each other for territory and other horrors that are going on in the world. These are not what we as self-conscious divine beings should be doing, yet we are doing it. So if we can, if there are enough true theosophists in the world, and there are amazing people in the world. I know, for example, probably a man we would call a wonderful theosophist. He is actually a Jesuit priest. His name is Gregory Boyle, and he has written a book called Tattoos on the Heart. And he helps gang warfare kids in Los Angeles. And because he is a priest, he is respected. And he has been able to turn a number of these kids around from, I mean, the most horrible situations, kids that have been in prison, kids that have been in the juvie, kids that are considered incorrigible. He has gone right to them and helped them. So he is kind of like a Father Damien of this century. And he's working right now in an area that very few people would want to work in. I mean, would want to go teach in East LA. That would be very hard for most of us. And so I think we can analogically say that perhaps after getting through the moon chain and all that, some of us said, oh, no, we don't want to. We don't want to go through that again. We don't want to incarnate again in that physical stream and go through a lot of work and suffering. Well, of course, this just put us behind. And so it's the same way. I remember once when I was a junior fellow of the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, some people there, and I mean, I included, thought, well, we're just far too intellectual to go down and help the poor we're talking about. But yet, Mother Teresa of Calcutta spoke 6 languages and was very intellectually brilliant. And, so what are you talking about? I mean, I really respect Father Boyle and the work he is doing. I mean, he is a great theosophist. And I really liked his book, and he talks about universal compassion, just as does the Dalai Lama. So I think you could see a great deal of unity between Christianity and Buddhism in the work of someone like Father Boyle, who is, from the broader definition, a true theosophist. So thank you for your question, Adam. So glad you're here. So are there other questions?
Looks like there's 2 more questions here. The next one is from Desiree.
Hi there, Judy. Here, I'll
Hello.
show myself here instead of
Okay.
hiding in the dark. That was such a beautiful presentation. And I have to tell you, I especially appreciate all of your personal introspective comments and that you're sharing right now about your personal experiences. Just going back to Monica's question, though, regarding the monad, I sometimes like to look at it just like light and light reflected, because when light gets reflected or goes through a prism, it separates, but it's actually one light. But when I think of the animal kingdom and this kind of synthesized consciousness, I like to look at not just the trees. Thanks, Merlin. I'm going to go buy that book right away, the one. But I think about ants and the way ants operate together. I mean, they don't need to necessarily communicate. They automatically know what to do and when to do it. So there's a synthesized consciousness in operation there. But as I think animals go through a process of gradually separating, they become more and more social. In other words, they need to actually be taught things out in the wild by their parents or by other animals from their kingdom or from their species. But I noticed that even with some animals who lose their, let's say they lose their parents or they become lost, require some kind of a socialization. They found that certain animals who are on their own will even seek out animals from another species altogether. That over time, over an evolutionary long period of time, becomes necessary. And I'm wondering if that type of evolution, that need to actually have some kind of socialization, is part of this process of becoming human. Because even though in this fully lit or semi-lit monastic state, we're able to take that light and reflect it. We're able to actually move it. Where other animals that are still really synthesized cannot move it on their own. They have to move it as a whole monad, as one big synthesized consciousness. And humans are different that way because we can actually move that energy. But I'm wondering about the stages of reaching that place where we can move it. We actually do require a kind of back and forth communication between each other, and we don't even recognize that it's happening, but it is. So can you speak to that? Just the fact that human beings, even though we seem to be separate, we really aren't, even in terms of things we can't see, like communication.
Okay, well, if this student understands the question, you really want to know about socialization of humans as it compares to other kingdoms such as ants or animals. Dogs, we know, if alone, will form packs because they need each other to survive, just as wolves do. All dogs are eventually derived from wolves, as I understand. And human beings require socialization, just as babies require mothers. We know that children left in orphanages sadly do not often grow enough or fully develop because they're not loved. And I think love is a great power and force in the universe. And of course, ants are very interesting. And I hate to say that this student as a child was very cruel to ants. I remember destroying an anthill with a hose once when I was about 10 years old and not told that I shouldn't do this because this is years of work to the ants. But I just thought it was kind of fun to make a mess out of their anthill, and I got stung by one of the red ants, which is quite justifiable. But to speak to light and socialization, I mean, we are all turning toward the light in theosophy, like as in Plato's cave. We have this point where we're either going to continue to wallow in the illusion of the physical senses or turn toward the light. And what we know as light, of course, is only a reflection on our plane of what Fohat is on the higher plane, the cosmic electricity of the universe. And we as human beings require the support of each other, just as we as theosophists form a sangha to help each other, even though individually we each have to do it ourselves. I mean, there's no teacher on earth that can help us if we're not going to help ourselves. The teacher points the way. But once we come together as a society or sangha, we can encourage, help, unite. And of course, we're united on either more subtle planes than we know of. We know that if one of us gets out of line, that it can affect the whole. And so we try as much as we can to keep everybody moving toward a higher direction. And of course, socialization is a very complex topic. There is social education, and there's also soul education, which will be considered in a few weeks. And I think social education precedes soul education, because unfortunately our modern educational system has mostly taught competition. And at least I was, as a child in Palo Alto, you've got to be smarter and you've got to be better than the other students. And of course, if you're a girl, you better be twice as good or you won't make it. And of course, I was taught, and especially at UC Berkeley, which was the most nasty competitive place I've ever been to, you made other people suffer. So I'm trying to answer the question fully, but that's as far as I should go perhaps at the moment with it. But thank you for your question, Desiree.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thanks, Monica.
Okay.
Kirk.
Well,
Gotta
time's
unmute.
up, isn't it?
Oh, hi, Kirk.
What's
Yeah,
that?
our time is up. Sorry, Kirk. No, I'm just kidding.
We
Let's
could go.
hear from
I
you.
could go a little bit over.
Well,
Yeah,
I just,
how's your energy level, Judy? You doing okay?
It's all right. I have a caregiver here who's going to stay a little later tonight, so I'm fine. I mean,
well, if I could just take a couple of minutes to touch on just a few points, because I think the questions were really just so excellent, as well as Judy's talks covering the, sort of the basic schematic that's laid out in the SD. But just a few points. So one, in regards to Jonathan's question, because it seems like the whole teaching regarding the monad is an answer to the question, how can everything be one and yet be many also and remain the one? How can there be this vast, complex cycle of evolution of so many planes and beings involved, and at the same time, everything remaining one thing? And in one of the kind of really striking statements that HPV makes in the SD is, and a very critical one, is you have to make this distinction between that which, the very ground, which she calls the absolute or beingness, which we would connect with the Atman. Atman is Brahman, right, in the Vedic, or rather Upanishadic and Advaita Vedanta system. But that is the ground of being from which the monad emerges. And that the monad, which is, again, you have to distinguish between the monad and the monads, right? So initially we're talking about the monad, the one that emerges from the ground of being. And she says that in this philosophy, there are two ones. The one would be the absolute. The second one would be that which emerges from it and which contains within it the whole, that everything that's going to emerge in that cycle, that entire Manvantaric cycle, all the beings, all the galaxies, the entire cosmos as a whole, is the one that is of a unified ocean of immortality. But it's not the boundless from which it emerged, right? It still has a limitation. And that's where you can also say that that's Atma Buddhi coming together, right? So, but in one sense, Buddhi is a limitation upon Atman, because it can never exhaust or equal that from which it emerges. And that's why, it's called the Anandamaya Kosha, because it is also a Maya, right? So that's just one point. And then the other thing that's really helpful in trying to get the overall schematic is that you have this, from that one that we would call Buddhi, or the Logos, you have a fundamental differentiation that she talks about in the second book of three basic classes of monads. There's those beings who have already passed through the human stage and are the guides and intelligences which radiate and manifest all that which emerges below it. That's one class of being. The other class of being is those monads radiated from the one monad who are going to enter the human stage in that particular cycle, right? And those can be subdivided, as well, as Judy started to point out, into different classes given in a given planetary cycle. But that's a specific category that is going to enter the human stage, has not in previous cycles entered, and is going to enter. And then the third is those monads who will not enter the human stage in this cycle, but who are preparing for it in future cycles. And that's all the lower, what we think of as all the lower kingdoms of nature, right? That's the monadic stream traveling through those kingdoms, preparing for the eventuality in a future Manvantara in which they will have the opportunity of entering the human kingdom. So that fundamental, and of which all our lower vestors are composed, right? We are composed, we are a reflection of that entire threefold differentiation of the monadic stream. Every human being is a mirror of it. And the other point is that when we talk about the monad that first emerges, the monad, before there's the differentiation into the monads, that can also be thought of as one and also as 10, because it contains all the potentiality of a fully realized being in the seventh round of the seventh race. It contains all the divine potential of a fully realized enlightened being, and all the experience that it would go through to reach that state. So it's both 1 and 10, and every monad, no matter what category it falls into, has that full 10-fold potential in it. Every point in visible or visible space is 10-fold, and that is why the divine pervades all of nature and of all human beings, no matter what. Like she says, in the ash of the cigarette, in the cat, and no matter what, all invisible space, we think of it as empty space. It's not empty. It is full of monads that are participating in this evolution. And it's both 1 and 10. It has that divine potentiality that we all have, but it's going through various stages of realization of that. And it has to do that through these vast cycles. So, and then just one last point is that all the flora and fauna, she says at one point in the SD, that is thrown off by human beings as they go through cyclic evolution. As we develop, we actually give birth to what we now think of as the animals and plants of the lower kingdoms. And so when we see sort of divine virtues being reflected in those kingdoms, that's a reflection of what human beings can realize self-consciously, right? And what we have at one time known and realized when upon first awakening, thanks to our predecessors who awoke the light of Manas within us, that we had that realization, and we exemplified those virtues, those golden qualities in nature. And but as we descended further, we made mistakes. Right? It's not just that we delayed, but we made fundamental errors. We began to identify with the vesture of incarnation rather than the unified spirit of nature, and by doing so, we became blind to our true nature and our true capacity. And that's other part of the grand story of why we're at where we're at. And also, and just as the final point is
We're
that
on number 6 now. 6 points. I'm
oh,
counting.
sorry. Yeah. So it's okay. Is responsibility, right? That any system of thought that undermines our sense of being responsible for everything that occurs karmically to ourselves and to the human system is false. Professor Iyer says at one point, and any system that encourages to take responsibility for the entire situation that we see around us and within us, that is tending us towards a true theosophical view. So anyway, sorry to go on so long.
Well, you said so much that I can't possibly comment on it all, but I know that the voice of the silence at one point says that nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. I mean, if we attain the bodhisattva stage, where our elder brothers are, angelic brothers are, that nature is a divine projection of the human monad, and that eventually it talks about in the 7th race, everything will be human, but I mean in the broader sense. I don't think this means that there won't be any trees or flowers or plants or anything of that sort, but we will recognize the divine nature of everything. And this is soul education, which comes after social education. And this can be only possible, of course, if one realizes that we are souls. And I mean, currently in academia, there's so much been the popular idea that we're simply featherless bipeds or some nonsense of that sort. But I think we made some progress today in understanding further about the one and the many. As Kirk was saying, there really is, perhaps one universal monad. Leibniz considered that to be God. Of course, he limited it by a Christian idea of a personal God, but a theosophy is both a monism, if you want to talk academically, and a polytheism, in that there are many minds above us who are gods. But to the lower kingdoms, we are gods. I remember rescuing a spider from my bathtub and tossing it outside, and maybe it told the other spiders that a great goddess rescued me from the maelstrom of the ocean. Well, it was just me taking a spider out of the bathtub. So we know there are beings as high above us as we're above the black beetle. William Q. Judge says that. So we have to realize that, yes, as we have made mistakes, but we can, the Bhagavad Gita says, even he who is the greatest of all sinners can still come unto me if he realizes the unity in all things. So I don't know if there's much more I could say, but your questions are absolutely wonderful, and your explanation. So thank you so very much, everybody.
Judy, thank you. I just wanted to say a few things if I could. First of all, absolutely brilliant all the way through. And we're just so lucky to have you, Judy. Did everybody notice this kind of rolling undercurrent of like comedy and hilarity the whole time? Just throwing things out.
So good.
And talking about the deepest of deepest subjects at the same time. So thank you very much. By the way, I think we've got a new system here where we're going to start getting caught up on the videos. So that's a good thing. And anybody who wants a copy of the video, email me. Okay. That way, I think we can just get on the ball a little quicker now here. And I also want to mention something else. Yes, there will be these great videos for the future and for posterity and for passing around to all of our friends, anybody that would like one. Yes, that's true, and that's really important. And yes, maybe we can do some editing of making not only these 1.5-hour videos, but doing like 10-minute videos and things like that, that'll, that people will just find, on their video streams and so forth. So that'll be pretty cool. But I just want to talk about something else. The fact that the 30 of us came together today and are putting out this idea of this living unity, of this living stream of Monadic unity and really universal brotherhood, but traveling through space and time together at all levels. Think how different that is than watching the news. Think of how that current of ideation that the 30 of us as kind of 30 force multipliers, if you will, kind of going out into the ether. That's incredible. And I can't help but think that it's not only going out, I guess, horizontally everywhere throughout the globe, but through space and into the future. And it's a current, and it's for our children and the grandchildren, their children, their grandchildren, etc. So thank you very much. That was pure theosophy. I really very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your support, everyone. And there's a great deal more to be said, and I'm going to have to go. But
Okay.
I really appreciate everyone's questions and comments. They're wonderful.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Judy, very
Everyone.
much.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you all readers, all your readers. Thank you.
Yes, thanks
Okay,
to all
yes.
the readers too. Thank you, Judy.
All right. Thank you. All right. Goodbye.
And
till
thanks
next time.
to San Diego for making it possible.
Yes,
Oh,
you
yes.
will.
Jonathan and all his work.
Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Everybody
Thank
take
you.
care.